You would think that the issue of women getting the right to vote would have been a big headline issue back then in 1909, but historians tell us that it was not a big headline issue, even though there were, hundreds and hundreds of people here lobbying for it. But the headlines, we are told, dealt more with horse racing, gambling, and, of course, prohibition. And in fact, the issue of prohibition was one of the political drags on women getting the right to vote. People who were opposed to prohibition often worried that if women got the right to vote, that they would support prohibition. But fortunately, women did secure in the 1909 session the measure going to the ballot in 1910 to give women the right to vote.
The bill went to the full House on January 28th, and its proponents, its main advocates, were Representative Bell and Representative Frank Bradsbury from Cedro-Woolley. They encountered many interesting arguments against suffrage. Some people said it wouldn't make any difference. Others said that it would be a huge mistake and would cost way too much money. Representative Bell countered these arguments by saying that this wouldn't cost anything. Women's suffrage wouldn't cost anything. We're putting it on the ballot for the people to decide. In the end, the bill passed the House of Representatives 70-18.
So the women, visualize here the women in the galleries being just ecstatic, women all over the legislative building who had been here to lobby for women's right to vote, ecstatic that it was going to now go from the House to the Senate, and they were sure it would pass easily. But the Morning Olympia newspaper predicted it would have problems. So why don't we go over to the Senate and we'll review what happened there. When the measure got to the Senate, it started out with a little bit of drama. The measure came over from the House, was read into the Senate, but before it was referred to committee, somebody moved to indefinitely postpone dealing with the issue at all. But fortunately, Senator Cottrell, who was a big supporter of women's right to vote, made a different motion to refer it to the Committee on Constitutions. And they even had to take a vote on that motion to refer it. So the vote to refer it to a favorable committee passed 22-13.
The ensuing battle was fractious. Senator George Piper, an anti-prohibitionist, nevertheless allied with the suffragists, and he did so in honor of his deceased mother, who was a strong believer in women's rights.
So when the bill came out of committee and back to the floor for consideration by the full Senate, there was quite a bit of discussion and a huge amount of lobbying going on, and that's when an historic split occurred in point of view on strategy between May Arkwright Hutton and Emma Smith DeVoe. And one of the big questions was, do you bring it to a vote right away, or do you count all your votes and be sure you have your votes before you bring it up for a vote before the Senate? They finally decided to be sure they had the votes among the members before they brought it up before the full Senate for a vote. I personally think that's a wise idea.
Emotions ran high, and Dr. Cora Smith Eaton, who was a suffragist, who also was the first woman to pass her medical board examinations in North Dakota, suggested that Hutton had talked to senators about buying their votes for $250 apiece. There were also accusations of swearing in front of the legislature.
Sounded kind of rough and tough.
It was.
Well, fortunately, my male predecessors here in the Senate in 1909 did vote to pass this measure on to the ballot for election in 1910. And on February 23, the measure passed the Senate by a vote of 30-9, with 3 senators absent. So you can see the Senate was a little smaller then than it is now. When Washington voters, the all-male voters in 1910, approved women's right to vote, that was a victory not only for the state of Washington, but it reignited the women's suffrage movement in the country. Washington was the 5th state to enact women's right to vote, and the first one in the 1900s. And following Washington's action, other states took action. Interestingly, they were all in the West. So the women's suffrage movement went from west to east, in contrast to many other movements in our country that go from the East Coast to the West Coast. So within 10 years, the U.S. Congress had enacted a national women's suffrage amendment that went out to all the states for ratification as an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So I think we here in Washington can take a lot of pride that we were a real spark plug for getting women's right to vote nationwide.